So my first takeaway is that the United States will be more focused on the domestic agenda than it has been any time since the 1930s. That doesn't mean that it will ignore the outside world, far from it, but it does mean that Europeans and others should expect a foreign policy that is one of what I would call retrenchment, a kind of pulling in, less expensive, less ambitious, less time and energy to focus abroad. There are two areas where I think you will see an immediate shift. In fact, it's happening as we speak. One is that the United States will come back to being a country that others look up to because it is governed in a democratic fashion. Liberal democracy at 12 o'clock just became back in vogue in the United States. And people around the world, myself included, will not wake up every morning and say, what the hell is going on here? Where is the Republican traditions that this country has been embracing since 1789? And that is to me hugely important, because it sends a signal around the world that the United States is back as part of a coalition of liberal democracies that will hang together. That to me is a huge important message to Europeans that have been stunned by the fact that the United States has essentially turned its back on its core European allies. And then the second big change, and again, we will see this today, the United States will be back to being a team player. No more unilateralism. We're going to go back to Paris climate. We're going to go back to the WHO. We're going to try to renegotiate the Iran nuclear deal. And that's all good news for Europeans and many others abroad. The key issues that I think will be on the agenda in the transatlantic relationship will, number one, be China. I think Biden and Tony Blinken and others are going to try to put together an allied consensus on China when it comes to trade, when it comes to supply chains, when it comes to high-tech AI. This is not going to be easy. And we just saw at the end of last year, the EU go ahead with an investment deal prior to Biden's inauguration. So there is going to be a difficult conversation on China. My recommendation would be that conversation should begin immediately. The sooner the US and the Europeans start talking about how to deal with China, the better. Second, I think that Biden will continue the pullback from the Middle East. Yes, Iran looms large, but Trump has been getting out of Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, hasn't wanted to touch Libya with a 10-foot pole. I don't see Biden changing that. And that raises questions in my mind about whether Europe is ready to do more in its neighborhood, including the larger Mediterranean basin. I watch carefully the debates in Europe about so-called strategic autonomy. As far as I can tell, it's more talk than it is action. But I do think that it would be wise for the EU or some, if you want to do it within NATO. I don't care about whether it's a Europe thing, a NATO thing, an EU thing. European allies of the United States should do what they can to pick up more slack. Because given the urgency of the domestic agenda, Biden will be looking to allies to do more, just like Trump did and just like Obama did. Final issue that I'll put out there, and because I think it's interesting to speculate on, and that is, how ideological will the Biden administration be? There's talk about a summit for democracies, turning the G7 into the D10, going back to building so-called liberal international order, being kind of liberal interventionists. And then there's a sort of different take on that, and that is that Biden himself has generally been more cautious, generally been someone who did not support the surge in Afghanistan, did not support going into Libya. And so I think there will be an interesting, I don't know if I'd call it a fight, but a debate inside about how important a role democracy promotion and liberal internationalism will be. For my money, we can't go back to the old days where we assumed that the liberal international order would anchor the global system. That didn't happen, and it won't happen. And so I do think we need to instill greater solidarity among democracies. But to me, the big challenges of the day are figuring out how to work with non-democracies, particularly China, on the big issues, because we can't tackle climate change, cybersecurity, extremism, the big, long list of international challenges, if we don't work with countries that don't necessarily share our values. Too much has changed. If the US is going to be focused like a laser on stimulus, on the pandemic, on employment, on the domestic agenda, on infrastructure, on healthcare, is there a lot of time and energy left over? Not a lot. Does that, I mean, can the US, walk and chew gum at the same time? Yes. But I do think that we're in an era in which the political sweet spot, where Democrats and Republicans can probably find common ground, is a less ambitious foreign policy. That's where the American electorate is. Look at Trump, look at where the Democratic platform was. Democratic platform said unambiguously, it's time to pull out of the Middle East and end these silly policies of regime change. So I think what you'll see is a kind of a struggle between the ideological dispositions of the team and a world and an America that have changed. Another big change that I think one has to address is that China will have the world's largest economy by the end of this decade. The world is changing. I think that will require more pragmatism, and it will mean that the United States doesn't get its way as easily as it used to. This is a work in progress, and I think that despite their ideological positions, they will, to put it euphemistically, be mugged by domestic and international reality.